Oh dear, the Soviets never did seem to have much luck with this kind of thing, these prestige projects designed to show off the technological superiority of the USSR. You only have to think of the abandoned space shuttles at the Baikonur Cosmodrome, or the massive N-1 moon rocket that never got off the ground without blowing up, the wholly optimistic Beriev A-60 laser plane, the innovative Caspian Sea monster, that enormous prototype hoverplane which sits today decaying on the shores of the said Caspian Sea, or the orbital laser battle platform that crashed into the sea instead of going into space. To this pantheon of impressive failures you can add the world's first supersonic passenger airliner, the communist Concorde, the Tupolev Tu-144, nicknamed by observers in the West as the Concordski. Bigger, faster and ahead of the European version, this Soviet megajet also failed to live up to its grandiose ambition, and failed in a very public and tragic way. On June 3, 1973, a production model of the Tupolev Tu-144 disintegrated mid-flight during a high-speed demonstration at the Paris Air Show. The fatal accident occurred during one of the most visible aviation events in the world, and although early in the lifespan of the Tu-144 this incident was indicative of the immense task that Soviets had set themselves, a task that ultimately would prove to be unsustainable. Seen in the context of the Cold War, the Tupolev Tu-144 was not simply a Russian supersonic airliner. It was a geopolitical symbol, born from the same competitive furnace that had produced Sputnik and the Saturn V rocket. By the early 1960s, the Soviet Union had staked enormous prestige on technological firsts. Sputnik was the first orbiting satellite, launched in 1957. By 1961, Yuri Gagarin had become the first man in space. Now, these were not just scientific achievements, they were ideological victories over the decadent West. So, when Britain and France formally launched the Concorde program in 1962, the prospect of a Western supersonic passenger jet threatened to shift the prestige. After all, if the capitalist West could deliver routine Mach 2 travel first, it would signal technological superiority in civilian airspace, a symbolic arena that the USSR would not concede. Plus, the idea of supersonic travel within Russia did kind of make sense as well. The country's so vast that flying from Moscow to cities in Siberia was the only viable option unless you had a spare week to take the train. For high-ranking politicians and Politburo members, the idea of hopping on the world's first supersonic airliner must have seemed like a win-win scenario. High-speed travel across Russia in comfort and giving the West the middle finger at the same time. So, in July 1963, following approval by the Soviet Council of Ministers, the Tu-144 project was formally started by the Tupolev Design Bureau. Its objective was simple but explicit: build a supersonic airliner that could match or beat Concorde in headline achievements and get it airborne by 1968. This schedule was extremely tight. Initial design concepts were rapidly developed, and on December 31st, 1968, the final day of the Soviet hierarchy's deadline, the first prototype flew. The Russians had done it, and they had beaten Concorde's maiden flight by a full 2 months. The Tupolev went on to achieve speeds of Mach 1 and Mach 2 months ahead of Concorde. The future of supersonic travel within the USSR must have seemed assured. With wide open skies, no bothersome environmental lobbies to worry about, and cities that were thousands of miles apart, the Tupolev was guaranteed domestic use, even if international travel was limited. But behind the headlines and the records being set, not everything was running smoothly. From the outset, the Tu-144 project operated under political pressure to achieve these firsts. The first flight, the first supersonic flight, the first passenger supersonic flight to exceed Mach 2 were all milestones that were reached, but they were often reached by squeezing development and testing into very tight timelines, and, as always when you do this, the cracks began to show, both figuratively and literally. Technically, the Tu-144 was an ambitious undertaking, almost certainly too ambitious for the time and the limited timeline given to develop it. One of the defining structural features of the Tupolev Tu-144 was its use of huge machined single aluminium panels to form large parts of the wing and the fuselage skin. The intention here was to reduce the number of rivets, to eliminate the lap joints, and to simplify assembly. In principle, this reduces stress fractures around those rivet lines, but in practice it created a whole set of different problems. For example, at sustained Mach 2 cruising speeds, skin temperatures can exceed 100 degrees centigrade in certain areas. The large monolithic panels experience significant thermal expansion and contraction during each flight. With fewer joints to absorb the differential strain, internal stresses built up across wide spans of material, which made the entire structure more sensitive to thermal fatigue. Any small manufacturing defects which were not discovered during machining could propagate into huge cracks under repeated heat and pressure cycling. During testing, some of the manufactured airframes developed cracks at just 70% of their designed operational load. Now, these weren't tiny hairline cracks, they were huge splits running sometimes for meters down the fuselage and the wings. One account tells of the prototype Tupolev making an emergency landing in Warsaw on its way back from the 1971 Paris Air Show. Apparently both left-hand engines had failed, forcing the emergency landing, but once on the tarmac, the ground crews noticed a huge crack running down the side of the fuselage. The engines also didn't help. The first 144s used Kuznetsov NK-144 afterburner engines. These engines delivered the required thrust, but at the cost of high fuel consumption and sustained afterburner use during parts of the cruise. Running the afterburners like this all the time significantly increased the exhaust temperatures and noise. As a result, the aircraft was extremely loud, both externally and also inside the cabin. For the passengers, the noise was like having a small chainsaw revving next to your ear during the whole flight. Passengers seated next to each other could have a conversation, but that's shout. And those who were seated more than 2 seats apart couldn't hear each other even when they were screaming, and apparently they used to have to communicate by passing handwritten notes instead. The noise in the rear of the cabin was described as unbearable. The resulting high fuel consumption limited the range of the 144 and also reduced cargo capacity. Later, they swapped the engines to ones that didn't need the afterburners on all the time, but the early operational image of the aircraft was already tied to a short range and a very high operating cost. One recent commentator talking about the plane summed it up succinctly. The Concorde was sheer luxury that you could enjoy while going fast. In the Tu-144, you went fast while it only just held itself together, and you better sit the f*** down and enjoy your survival and just hope that you didn't go deaf during the flight. June the 3rd, 1973, the final day of the Paris Air Show, and the Tu-144 and the Concorde were both scheduled to perform. Although the Tupolev had made an appearance at the 1971 show, this time around it wasn't the prototype plane. It was the second fully spec'd plane to come off the production line. Improvements over the prototype included retractable landing gear and the addition of the canards, little wings, behind the cockpit, which helped with stability during takeoff and landing. French and Soviet accounts from the time confirmed that there was fierce competition between the two teams. The Concorde flew its demonstration first. By all accounts, it was a pretty routine affair, which didn't involve any aerobatics. Then the Tu-144 took off, piloted by hero of the Soviet Union Colonel Mikhail Kozlov. "Just wait until you see us fly," he was quoted as saying, "then you'll see something." Well, he wasn't kidding about that. After a steep takeoff, he flew for several minutes, putting the Tupolev through its paces as the mesmerised crowd watched the huge airliner twisting in the air above them. Then the plane came in low, flew a high-speed pass above the runway with the landing gear out and the canards extended. Then, with all 4 engines at full power, it went into a steep and rapid climb. As the aircraft climbed, it appeared to stall and fell into a steep nose-down descent. Video and eyewitness accounts show that this descent was deeper and faster than planned for any normal demonstration manoeuvre. As the aircraft hurtled earthwards, the crew attempted a recovery pull-up, but the airframe just couldn't take the forces being exerted on it. From the video, it looks like most of the left wing just shears off, and the rest of the plane then rolls over in the air, the fuselage breaks in half, and the burning debris crashes to the ground, sections of it landing on the village and residents of Guzanville. All 6 crew members were killed, and 8 people, including children, died in the village as the debris rained down. Around 60 people were injured, many seriously, being badly burned, losing limbs, and suffering severe trauma from flying debris. Local fire brigades, police and medical services were quickly on the scene, coordinating search and rescue amid fires and damaged buildings. French civil defence units worked tirelessly to extinguish the fires, stabilise damaged buildings, and treat victims on site. It was a disaster. So what went wrong, apart from the obvious pushing the plane beyond its limits scenario? Well, the French report into the crash had to deal with the political sensitivities of the time, and also the Russian sensitivity of having the wreckage of one of its prestige airliners sitting in a French aircraft hangar for all and sundry to see. The official report did not identify a definitive initiating cause. Diplomatically, it concluded that the aircraft broke apart under extreme aerodynamic loads during recovery from a steep descent, but it could not determine what triggered the manoeuvre. The lack of motive, for want of a better word, has left the case essentially unresolved. But nature and people abhor a vacuum, and as a result, several theories have emerged about what actually caused the Concordski to go down in flames. The mirage theory. One hypothesis is that the pilots initiated a steep dive to avoid a collision with a French Air Force Mirage jet, which was flying close to the Tupolev, taking photographs of it during the display. Whether its presence influenced the Soviet crew's manoeuvre was examined but never conclusively established. The Mirage was there, and it was in the vicinity of the Tupolev, but did it cause the pilots to nose down and stall? That we'll never know. The modification theory. The flight control limiters were adjusted to allow the aircraft to perform more daring aerobatic manoeuvres to deliberately show that the 144 was better than the Concorde. Pilot pushes the envelope, but lack of limiters makes the plane unstable. A popular theory, but again, it's not proven. The cockpit cameraman theory. Apparently, a TV cameraman was in the cockpit during the flight and probably not seated. He may have fallen into the control area, the camera jams the controls, the plane dives. Again, possible, but ultimately unprovable. Or finally, the hot stick theory. Just under pressure to perform, the pilot attempts a spectacular but risky climb, results in a stall and loss of control. Pilot Bob Hoover, who saw this fatal crash, believes that the pilot tried to outdo the Concorde by pulling up faster and climbing harder. He pulled the nose up so steeply, I didn't believe he could possibly recover. Well, those are the most popular theories. Maybe one or more are right. Unless new information comes to light, we'll never know for sure. The crash at the 1973 Paris Air Show did not immediately end the Tu-144 program. The Soviet government had invested too much into the aircraft to just give up after one crash, and the political objective, demonstrating that the USSR could operate a supersonic passenger airliner, still remained. And so test flights resumed, and engineers continued to refine the design. A new variant, the Tu-144S, entered limited operational service with Aeroflot in the mid-1970s. The route selected for the aircraft was Moscow to Alma-Ata in Kazakhstan. This route was chosen largely because it crossed long stretches of sparsely populated territory where the sonic booms would cause fewer problems. The aircraft's first operational flights weren't even passenger services anyway. Beginning in December 1975, the Tu-144 carried mail and cargo on the Moscow-Alma-Ata route while the airline evaluated the aircraft's reliability, a sensible precaution, all things considered. The passenger service finally began on the 1st of November 1977. There was one flight a week to Alma-Ata. The aircraft carried around 120 passengers on each flight, cruising at roughly Mach 2 at altitudes near 56,000 feet. The journey time was just 2 hours, and it was significantly faster than conventional airliners at the time. But the service was plagued with problems. General unreliability, high operating costs, and maintenance complexity made the aircraft difficult to operate on a regular schedule. Crews reported constant technical issues, and the aircraft required extensive ground support after each and every flight. Then, on the 23rd of May 1978, a Tu-144D prototype crashed during a test flight near Yegorovsk after a fuel leak caused a fire in the engine nacelle and subsequent engine failure. 2 crew members were killed. Even though the aircraft involved was not part of the passenger fleet, the accident did nothing to ease concerns about the aircraft's safety and reliability. Within weeks, the Soviet authorities decided to quit while they were ahead and suspended all Tu-144 passenger operations. In total, the Tu-144 conducted only 55 passenger flights during its entire operational life. By comparison, Concorde entered service in 1976 and went on to fly the famous London-New York route for more than 2 decades, remaining in service until 2003. The poor old Concordski got to fly to glamorous Alma-Ata and managed a grand total of just 7 months of service. A small number of aircraft continued flying in limited roles after that. Some were used for cargo flights or mail transport or testing, but these operations were sporadic and they were gradually wound down throughout the early 1980s. By the middle of the decade, the aircraft had effectively disappeared from use. One aircraft would return to the air years later as part of a joint Russian-American research program. The rest of the fleet never flew again. Out of the 17 Tupolevs that were built, an estimated 9 survive today. 6 are on show as museum exhibits, 5 in Russia and 1 in Germany, displayed alongside its sister, the Concorde. The final Tu-144 that was under construction, chassis number CCP 77116, was never completed. Work on the aircraft stopped in 1985 as the program lost political support and funding. For decades, the partially built airframe was left sitting outside at Vorozhny East Airfield, unfinished, its assembly halted permanently. A sad reminder of overreaching ambition and the promise of a supersonic future that never came to pass.